Hello, my name is Dr. Gary Simmons, and this is part 3 in the video series, The Integral Membership System. In part 1, I talked about a phenomenon associated with the minister-centric ministry practice, and that is, in that practice, we have no structures of accountability for our governing or voting members. And indeed, in most roles with accountabilities in the minister-centric ministry practice, we do not have explicit accountabilities. In other words, not only are our roles within our church rarely linked to intentional aims that are to fulfill the purpose of the church, what we count on people for is not explicit. In other words, we don't tell them precisely what they do in order to fulfill the need or the expectation or the aim of the specific role that we're inviting people to engage. And because membership, voting member, is an organizational role, not to have explicit accountabilities associated with that role and the structures to hold people accountable to what they say yes to, we're really creating quite a dysfunction in this regard. And so I'm wanting to share how in the mission-centric ministry practice this all changes, and how we do in the integral membership system have a process of holding everyone who is fulfilling any integral role in the organization or in the community does have explicit accountabilities that they say yes to. And I'm going to illustrate that before we get started in talking about the phase 2 portion of the integral membership system. In the context of the labyrinth, it's the return phase. In the context of our moving the integral membership system forward, it's the final phase in which we introduce the principle of ownership and partnership. And that's something that we have yet to really talk about and integrate insofar as the benefit of the integral membership system and its process. So with that said, I'm wanting to begin the conversation about this principle of accountability. And so right now I'm showing you this picture of a stool, which helps us understand that accountabilities live in the broader context of organizational structure. Structures, practices, and systems define the context or the elements of our organizational behavior. But suffice it to say, when we think about what someone is accountable for, we all also think about who they're accountable to. And so typically our concept of accountabilities lives in the broader context of a hierarchy of sorts. In other words, there's somebody above me that I'm accountable to, and there's things that I'm accountable for with respect to my performance or the job I'm supposed to fulfill. And so that presents itself with its own kind of set of unintended consequences when we have that as our organizational context or framework for talking about roles and accountabilities. So when we're in the conversation, who are you accountable to? Let's work this example with the stool that we have. So the stool as a metaphor for organizational structure is only a structure that works if its component parts have integrity. And so we can imagine all the ways in which a stool, for instance, would be out of integrity. In other words, unable to support the weight of life experience. When someone sits down on it, if there's something wrong with how the legs are in relationship, or if there's a leg that has a defect, its composition is such that it is no longer sufficient to be able to function in its role in relationship to the other parts of the stool. If the stool is not on solid ground, and let's just imagine the stool being kind of placed in the sand, well then some of the structural deficiencies would become apparent just in the observation of things. But yet when the stool is forced to bear the weight of the organizational experience, then these deformities become more evident. But just in the example of just looking at the stool as a metaphor for the soundness, one element of the soundness of an organization, and we just are in the question. For instance, you have these 4 legs. You have a staff leg and minister leg and a board leg and a voting or governing membership leg, which comprises the components of one way to look at the soundness of the organization. The relationship, how these legs function in relationship to one another, is also a component part of the soundness or the integrity of the organization. So when asked the question, who does the staff report to or is accountable to? In a room full of ministry leaders, I want to hear just one response, and that is all staff is accountable to the minister, who is functionally the CEO of the organization. The leg that is the staff reports to the minister. The minister hires and fires the individual, serves in those roles, but the board establishes and funds those positions. All right, next. Who is the minister or the ministerial credential leaders accountable to? Well, they're accountable to the Board of Trustees. The board hires and fires the minister, and the community or the organization funds that role as a part of the process. And then who is the board or the core council accountable to? Well, obviously, it's the board or the core council is accountable to the governing or the voting membership. And then finally, who is the governing or voting membership accountable to? Well, no one. There is no structure of accountability for our voting or governing members. There is none in the minister-centric ministry practice. Anyway, the point is that there are no structures of accountabilities for our governing member. And so absent of there being a way in which we can hold people accountable to what they say yes to, we're really creating a kind of dysfunction built in to our ministry practice. But a better question, rather than asking the question, who are you accountable to, what are you accountable for, it's a better question to ask, what do others count on you for? And when we begin to ask that question, because that is the reality of all relationships, in the context of especially our work in ministry, all relationships are interdependent. We count on each other for a number of things. Well, yes, I might report to my board, but I count on my board for stuff too, as well as my board counts on me for things. And so the dynamic of what we count on each other for creates a whole different way of understanding how we're connected in our relationships. And when we understand that our relationships and the ways in which we count on each other for goes every which way. In other words, not only does the minister count on the board, but the board counts on the minister. Not only does the staff count on the minister, but the minister counts on the staff, and so on and so forth. Everywhere within the system, we have things that we count on each other for. And absent of a way of being able to articulate exactly what we count on people for, then people don't accurately know what they say yes to. In other words, when we involve people into greater ownership or greater service, when we ask them to help, we often do so in the context of gifting them with the honor to serve in our ministry, but we do so absent of telling them exactly what they say yes to. And so I'm wanting to make a point about this, because ultimately we're going to have to come up with what our governing members say yes to if it's going to be a functional system for us. So when we look at this question of accountabilities, we're asking two things. What do others count on me for, and what do I count on others for? So that gives us a sense of understanding that regardless of who is above or below, when it boils down to our effectiveness as a team, when it boils down to our capacity to evolve our organization, we all have to participate in taking ownership of what we say yes to and be in integrity with that yes. And so when we understand that we always count on each other for, then the next question is what exactly is it that we count on each other for? Now, I don't have time to go into great detail with respect to how we can actually restructure our roles and accountabilities in such a way as we build into all relationships structure of accountability. Let's say, for instance, I count on Jane, my wife Jane, for stuff, and that Jane counts on me for things as well. And so in my effort to get clear as to what I count on Jane for, and then be in the question, well, I wonder what in turn Jane would count on me for, I'm wanting to facilitate this brief example. So the accountabilities are written in a specific fashion. We begin with an ing verb that describes something that someone does that fulfills a need or an expectation or an aim of a specific role within our ministry, whether it be an organizational role, a paid staff role, or a volunteer role. And so to be in this process, using this example, let's say, for instance, I count on Jane for emptying the dishwasher. I count on Jane for filing our receipts. And I count on Jane for ironing my dress shirts. Okay, now that doesn't say anything about whether or not Jane is willing to do those things. I'm just trying to explain that on one half of, on this side of the relationship, this might be how I begin to formulate what I count on Jane for, by just coming up with the things that I am aware that these are the things that I count on her for. Jane counts on me for loading the dishwasher, and she counts on me for paying the bills. She also counts on me for mowing the lawn. And so in this context, as we kind of wonder what each of us count on each other for, obviously the next step is to sit down with that person and say, hey, this is what I count on you for. Can you say yes to these things? And so Jane might say, well, don't count on me for ironing your dress shirts. That's never going to happen. And so if I'm living counting on her to do that, and she's oblivious to that, or has not really weighed in with respect to that accountability, can you see how it's kind of setting me up for being disappointed, because here I am counting on her to do something and she has no awareness that that's a need. In other words, that becomes an unspoken, that becomes an implicit accountability rather than explicit accountability. So there is a deeper process that I'll do a video series on, just about looking at all of your roles and linking those roles to intentional aims that are all about fulfilling your purpose. If you don't have your roles and accountabilities linked to intentional aims that are about fulfilling your ministry's purpose, then you're leaking energy as an organization. That's a whole nother video series, and that's a place where we have to focus our attention, and it's also part of the Mission-Centric Ministry Coaching Program. So now we're going to be looking at the governing member role and the process by which that unfolds. First of all, let me just remind you that we have two phases in the integral membership system. The first phase is all about leveraging the value of belonging. Once again, as a reminder, we're not trying to get people to join the church. The membership process lives in the context of our organizational practice, and in the context of our welcoming system that has as its aim to bring people into a transformative experience, such as through spirit groups, meaningful involvement, participating classes, and other opportunities, as well as engaging in the conversation, the first conversation about a minimum member contribution. All of these efforts are to begin to introduce those who are relatively new to our organization to beginning to get involved without trying to overwhelm them with information that is just going to perhaps complicate their process of settling in and acclimating to our community, and deciding whether or not this is a good fit for them. And so the community member process just lives as an opportunity for them to gain and have a felt experience of deepening their relationship to the church. Then the second phase of membership, the governing member role, happens in time. So in other words, in the integral membership system, a person needs to have been a community member for at least a year before they're eligible to make application for the governing member role. And so there are qualifications associated with the governing member role. So throughout the entire integral membership system, you'll never hear us talk about requirements because folks have an allergy with respect to that word or the concept. They have an allergy with respect to anything that has a hint of hierarchies or exclusivity. And so we want to disarm those kinds of sensitivities with respect to this membership process, because this is really about developing and cultivating more emotional and spiritual maturity as people journey with us, then ultimately cultivating owner partners as they go through the final phase of this membership process. So when people find their way to our ministry, their interest doesn't live in the context of the organization. So the two phases of the integral membership system, the first phase is all about the community, all about this idea of leveraging their value to belong and recognizing that they're in the culture of receivership. They're not in the culture of ownership. So they want to be fed, they want to be nurtured. And so we want to provide them with the experiences that transform their life so that very quickly they see the benefit and value of deepening their relationship to the community. And then when they get to the sense that, wow, this organization has really gifted me, they begin to be interested in deepening their relationship even further. And so questions about how do I become a voting member or a governing member might emerge. And so in the context of that effort, we have a very simple membership brochure that answers people's questions about membership at Unity Spiritual Center. And that membership brochure basically explains that we have two facets or two phases of our membership system, and there are no requirements, but these are the three things that you say yes to as a community member, and these are the things that qualify you for the governing member role. And so that, so as you can see in the organizational side of things, the phase 2 aspect of the integral membership system is all about bringing people into the competencies associated with that role of being a governing member. And so the governing member does have a vote, and it's important to understand that people, when they enter into a more structured relationship with the organization, that's something different than their relationship to the community. The bar is raised with respect to their involvement in the organization. And so the elements of phase 2, the phase 2 components of the integral membership system, begins with owner-partner development. And so the owner-partner development aspect of the integral membership system is a placeholder right now until later on in Unity Spiritual Center Spokane's process. We'll develop more qualifications, more components. But for right now, I'm wanting to give you a snapshot of both what the integral membership system is designed to kind of accommodate in terms of its evolving structure. In other words, the process of the integral membership system itself evolves so that community members and governing members, their qualifications are enhanced or complexified over time as circumstances necessitate. But in the beginning of introducing the entire system, which as a reminder has taken us 3 years to complete the whole cycle, in the course of introducing it, you have to begin in a simple, basic way. And so the qualifications for our community member are very simple. There's just 3 things that they say yes to, and the qualification for a governing member is simple as well, except the bar is raised because we're talking about a more integral role that is beyond just being a volunteer, but now there are responsibilities and privileges associated with the governing member role as per our bylaws. And so, the intent is to create a process by which those who are in proximity to making an application, they fulfilled their first year of their community membership. We've tracked their minimum member contribution because we're required to by law. And so we are able to say yes to someone that they have fulfilled their year's commitment, and then they're eligible to make application, providing that they also have completed the Q process. Not just taking that workshop, but actually have gone through the 21-day debriefing experience, which is really about mastering the Q process. That's a qualification. Before they're able to make application, they'll need to have completed that. So right now, that's the single qualification that we have with respect to how our first year's worth of introducing the governing member phase of the integral membership system. That's all that we're doing thus far. And so I'll say more about the actual process itself, but just let me complete giving you the picture of the governing member phase of the integral membership system. So in addition to them qualifying by taking the Q process and going through the debriefing experience, and in the context of our more enhanced version that will unfold in time, there'll be an owner-partner development aspect of their qualifications that may be in the form of a workshop or other modules or leadership trainings that might be available. In addition to that, we also have board training every single year where the entire congregation is invited to attend. And so once we've done that for a few cycles, we'll eventually make a qualification of attending our board training as a qualification for the governing member role. Now, that might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but just think about it. Should not all governing members have the ability to understand what is the job of our senior leaders, our board, and the minister? What's their job in the context of governance in fulfilling our fiduciary responsibilities as an entity in whatever state that we're incorporated in? So our governing members needs to have that information so they can hold us as leaders accountable, because that's the way we optimize our effectiveness, especially in the mission-centric ministry practice. And so there's an orientation process. I'll talk about that, and then we install our governing members by bringing them up on a Sunday morning and giving them a certificate and welcoming them into that dimension of our community, of our fellowship. And then finally, there's always development after that. All aspects of our integral membership system has a leadership development component to it. And so with Unity Worldwide Ministries Online Spiritual Institute, there's a wealth of opportunities for us to channel leadership development through those resources that are serving our movement well these days. And I know for CSL, the Holmes Institute, and other distance learning opportunities can all be a part of organizing an effort to make sure that our individual leaders within our ministry are getting the support that they need to step into ever greater roles and effectiveness in our ministry practice. All right, so with understanding how we develop and nurture people into this process of awakening to their capacity to make a difference, not only in their own personal life, but in the context of our organization, leadership development is something that we want to do intentionally, as opposed to just allow our leaders to show up by accident. In the course of looking at how qualifications are identified and brought into the integral membership process, the governing member role is uniquely important with respect to our due diligence in this regard. In other words, we have to be willing to be in the effort to answer some questions, such as, what are the qualifications that we want to identify for our governing members? In other words, what are the competencies they need to demonstrate, and so what experiences do they need to have in order to embody those qualifications? In other words, what must they do to get qualified, in other words? And so the second thing is to identify the steps that people must take in order to get qualified with respect to a certain competency or in a certain arena of competencies. And then The third thing is that we must determine what a person is counted on with respect to fulfilling their role. Not only do we have to have a clarity with respect to what the role is all about, but we also need to understand what is counted on with respect to serving in that role, which is another way of looking at the qualifications. It's another way of looking at what someone must do in order to fulfill those qualifications. To understand what someone is counted on for gives them also a context of how that role lives and their responsibilities over time. And then finally, a process needs to be created that boils all of that down to just precisely what someone says yes to when they fill out that application. And so in our process here at Unity Spiritual Center, because we're still new in bringing our cycle online and having the experience over time to enhance our system, our process is quite simple. So once again, the only qualification that our current applicants need to have fulfilled prior to their making application is completing the Q process and going through the 21 debriefing experience. And then our orientation process invites all the new applicants to come and attend a board meeting that is designed specifically to accommodate our group of new governing members. And at the board meeting, we take special care to welcome them, and so our process is that we allot an hour during a regular scheduled board meeting right up front and for the new governing member orientation. And a part of that hour, what happens is, in the governing member orientation, we invite people to talk about their transformative stories, how the ministry has really blessed them. We're introducing them to the concept of holding up the mirror and conditioning them, in addition to the broader community, to welcome that, because it enables the entire organization, in the context of our growing ownership and growing partnership, to really own, because how the church is doing is about us. It's not about the leadership. It's about how we are co-creating this together. And so as we welcome our governing members, as we invite them into greater ownership and partner with us, and be able to make our conversations about our sustainability and our future something that excites us, as opposed to feeling like we're going to bum somebody out, or we're being needy or negative or in lack. So all of these are important strategies for really setting the stage where those who become our governing members now are our partners. And so we have much more to talk about with respect to the unfolding narrative that is embedded in all of these aspects of the systems and modules associated with the Mission-Centric Ministry Coaching Program. The narrative that sculpts the invitation to bring people into their own experience of their capacity to make a difference in their own personal life, and allowing that to be translated into their capacity to make a difference in the life of our ministry. So as we open to the possibilities of our future, especially as we look at the challenges that we have with what is now decaying, what is now our archaic tithing-based funding practice, there's great possibilities when we really bring people into an understanding that what we can co-create together is only limited by our capacity to know our own worth. And while that might be the crux of the matter underlying all funding issues, is that not the better approach to deal with our sense of not enough, by not asking people to give more, but by awakening to our own capacity to be more? Because when we understand what's trying to express itself, what's trying to get out and express what we have within us, when we understand what that's really about, we do more. We do more in the presence of what the need is. And so it's that simple. And we need to move in that direction, because that brings optimism, that brings hope, that brings empowerment, that brings the sense that we can do this. We can do anything that we set our mind to. The challenge is that we have to create cultural tipping points that bring our whole community into the experience of evolving beyond our yesterday selves. And so finally, the last thing I'm going to say about the integral membership system is that there are some bylaws changes that may be needed. In other words, your term of governing member or voting member needs to be changed to 1 year, so that annually everyone's voting membership expires, and then everyone has to reaffirm their yes. And so this is how you keep your governing members accountable to what they say yes to, is that every year all members expire and all members must renew their yeses. And so every year all of our governing members have to renew their yeses. And in this cycle, they had to renew their yes, that they will continue to engage a deepening of their spiritual practice through spirit groups. And they had to say yes to increasing their meaningful involvement and service through spirit groups or other forms of service or classes, of course. And we've also invited them to say yes again to deepening their financial commitment by designating a deeper commitment to the ministry and giving us exactly what we can count on in that regard. And so keep this in mind as you consider the integral membership system. Once again, in the context of the Mission-Centric Ministry Coaching Program, it lives in the context of following the shadow work piece, because we really can't do this deeper work of evolving people's emotional and spiritual maturity when they're still carrying with them the sense that they're a victim, or their sense that they're not enough, or they're unworthy. And so the whole new funding model, as well as the integral membership system, is also built upon the principle that as people manage and deal with their own sense of not enough, that they'll move into a greater expression of who and what they've come here to be. And this is something that we leverage throughout the entire process as we develop the narrative around ownership, around partnership. It lives in the context of who and what we've come here to be. And it's not, and so it's important that we're abandoning the effort of trying to kind of coax people to give more, because once again, as soon as they get connected to their sense of not enough, they disconnect, they shut down. So our effort is always focused on helping people to learn how to be more. And so that's why shadow work, that's why the Q process is integral to the whole entire program. And so it's important that while you're excited about what is possible with the new funding model and integral membership system, you need to know that you just can't introduce this until there's a depth of shadow work that takes place, so that the community has evolved to a place where the principles in ownership and partnership are principles that can be activated independent of their sense of not enough. And so I'll have more to say about that. So stay tuned. There's a lot more coming. God bless you.